It's another slate where we have several potential shootouts available and also some questionable value at running back, which we have to decipher if we can actually trust it or if we're better off looking elsewhere. So a lot to discuss. Let's dive on in and get you set for the Week 10 NFL DFS main slate. Welcome on in to the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor of numberFire. Brandon, we're on to Week 10. A very interesting slate because I think there are multiple ways you can play it, maybe not multiple ways you should play it. How are you doing today, and what are you seeing here?
Yeah, a little frantic. Just got in at the buzzer. It's having some technical difficulties. Didn't get to grab a hat, so I don't know if my analysis will be on the usual level that it typically is, but maybe it'll be better. I don't know. But
does your brain feed off of hat energy, just channels in?
I feel more myself when I have my hat on. I feel like all my thoughts can be contained, and I'll only give out the good ones.
Maybe this will actually lead to the true golden takes we possibly could have been tapping into for the past 5 years.
Yeah, maybe. Although I think we are kind of going back in time here this week, like you alluded to,
yeah.
With running backs. We have really three big running backs on the slate with Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, and I think you and I would both agree Miles Sanders, but we also have some somewhat appealing value backs. And on this podcast, we pay up at running back. It's been a very different year, but now with the studs back, we saw last week what can happen if you spend down at running back and don't get access to someone like Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, or both these guys who can put up 30 FanDuel points. So I think that's going to be the biggest discussion point for us on this, next hour or so.
Right. And I think the reason that it is a discussion is because if you want to take down a tournament, you can do so with a guy who gets you 12 points out of running back, but your odds of doing so are pretty low. You realistically need 18.
You have no room for error.
Yeah, you make it where you're basically making an 8-player parlay on the rest of your line if you do that. And again, that can happen, but is it gonna happen? Probably not. So I think that's the key to ask today is it's not about the floor for the value running backs. It's about whether or not they have access to a ceiling. And I think that's going to be the big question, which we'll talk about throughout. So we'll get into that in just 1 second. But first, the Week 10 FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League is posted. As always, it's a $5 entry with 3 entries max, and it is rate-free. That means FanDuel makes nothing off of this contest. All the entry fees go back to you, the listeners. To enter, go to FanDuel.com/league/listener league. That's FanDuel.com/league/listener league. If you're listening to this now on YouTube, you can also go to numberFire, check out the Week 9 recap podcast post. If you're listening to it now or on the podcast feed, go to the Week 10 preview podcast post up on numberFire. You'll find a link in there as well. Otherwise, FanDuel.com/league/listener league. Eligibility restrictions apply. Let's take a look at this slate here and just the overview. And I think to me, the easy thing is the game stacks. I think that Buffalo, Arizona, an obvious one. The Rams, Seahawks, another obvious one. There are other secondary stacks we'll talk about throughout the podcast for today. So the question is, how do you rank them? And then do we take the bait on the value running backs? And I think that is, I phrased it that way intentionally because I don't think there is a lot of certainty in the value plays. We might have Duke Johnson. We might have we will have Mike Davis. We might have Jerick McKinnon as a potential value option. We might have you could consider a Kenyon Drake type guy, maybe. So we have options, but do we have good options? I think those are the key questions for me, Brandon. What are the key questions for you on this slate?
Yeah, similar question, but different because we're both on the same page where the higher salaried running backs traditionally are more appealing. But the thing I always feel bad about whenever we talk about the high salaried running backs is we kind of dismiss the high salaried receivers as a result because you can't really play both. So I think a big question this week is realistically, I know we're going to sit here and say we love Kamara, Aaron Jones, and Miles Sanders, but we're not going to talk a lot about Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, DK Metcalf, Stephon Diggs. It's not that we don't like them, but realistically, like if we're playing 10 lineups, can we get to any Devontae at 9,500? If we're playing 100 lineups, how many of those are anchored by the receivers instead of the running backs? Probably for us, not that many, but the reason for that is historically, if you look at fantasy assets by salary rank, the RB1 for a main slate is roughly 12th in salary. And the wide receiver one is usually like 21st, which really just goes to show. And actually, that if you go to the RB2 and wide receiver 2, that's 11th and 28th respectively, which goes to show that a lot of wide receivers, not necessarily just the high salaried ones, can put up, top 2 numbers for that slate. So one thing I wanted to just key in on was we're not going to talk about Devontae too much. We're not going to talk about DeAndre Hopkins, but realistically, from an actionable standpoint, are you going to have any Devontae? I know you're going to have some, but how much?
Yeah, I think that's a big question. And I mean, it helps that it's pretty windy looking out in Green Bay and that they are massive, massive favorites, which may decrease the necessity to throw. Thankfully, Jake Luton is playing, which means it'll be a closer game than it would be if Gardner Minshew were playing, obviously. But not
even Devontae specifically.
Yeah. I know what you're saying. And I think that for me, going off of that, the other thing I'm looking for today is low salary exposure to those 2 big games. And I guess it depends on how you view Houston, Cleveland, Las Vegas, Denver, et cetera, et cetera. I want low salary exposure to those games. Can I find it? I can. I'm just going to tell you now I can, because there are a lot of guys we'll talk about today who are low salary exposure to those games, and that's what I want to utilize, is finding those guys, cheap access to high scores. I think I can get that. So let's dive on in here and start things off with the injuries and talk about some of those value backs. Christian McCaffrey's return was short-lived. There is news today that he may be back next week, but has been ruled out for this week already. Puts Mike Davis back into the lead role, but things were kind of shaky for him in the final few games. They're also facing the Bucs, who are elite against the run. So we'll talk about this game in the bookmaker section. David Johnson seems to be in limbo this week due to his concussion. He didn't practice on Wednesday. Duke Johnson played 81% of the snaps last week. He had 16 carries and 4 targets. It's also a revenge game. We'll talk more about them. In the trends discussion, Kenyon Drake returned to a full practice, or limited practice, should say, Wednesday, indicating he should return from a 1-game absence. If Drake sits, we're both in on Chase Edmonds. I don't think that's worth discussing. We're just in there. Yeah. But would you use Drake at $6,000 if he gets in a full practice by Friday?
So I think the question you have to ask is, does Kenyon Drake return to the same role that he had prior to injury? Does he return to a lesser role because of what Chase Edmonds did last week? Although a lot of opportunity, not necessarily anything to say that he can't play Kenyon Drake. Or does he return to more because of what Chase Edmonds did last week, which was not a whole lot? So we're not going to know that answer. And as somebody who plays a lot of Kenyon Drake, at least early on in the season, I am a little bit hesitant. I don't see, we want to talk upside, especially compared to the higher salaried running backs. I don't think Kenyon Drake really has that. I don't see Kenyon Drake playing 90% of the snaps all of a sudden. He's going to be in that 60 to 70% range, and he still has the same issues, I would think, unless he's now healthier all of a sudden. But, I'll have some when I'm stacking if he plays, but not a whole lot. What about you?
I think that I view him a little bit more favorably than some of the value backs. And his salary is pretty close to them. So that in turn makes him viable. But I can't feel great about it. The reason that I feel interested here is the Bills are really bad against the rush, which means that, and I think the Cardinals seem to be cognizant of matchups, given the way they used Christian Kirk in week 1 against Richard Sherman, given the way they, didn't throw the ball to DeAndre Hopkins last week when he was in a tough cornerback matchup. I think that they understand ways to attack teams, and the ways you want to attack the Bills is in the middle of the field, with the ground game, with stuff like that. So I think that bodes a little bit well for Kenyon Drake. I can't feel great about him. He can't be a core play because his usage is pretty bad. But like there is a path to a good game. And I think that's enough to get me to have some exposure, potentially more so than guys like Duke, who we'll talk about later on, and potentially more than Mike Davis, too. The 49ers will likely be without Raheem Mostert, Tevin Coleman, and Jeffrey Wilson Jr. this week again. That leaves just Jerick McKinnon and JaMychal Hasty for their matchup with the Saints. They also didn't have Deebo Samuel in practice on Wednesday, and they'll obviously not have Jimmy Garoppolo and George Kittle. We'll talk more about the 49ers in the bookmakers section. We don't have a ton of info yet, but Antonio Gibson missed practice Wednesday with a shoulder issue. J.D. McKissick is $5,200, and he had 14 targets last week. Would you take any swipes at him if Gibson were to sit?
That's another one of those, like, what's the upside?
He's like James White, except in a worse off. He's like old James White in a worse offense.
Yeah, I think that's realistic. I don't know what the touchdown equity really is within that offense and with his role. I think I would probably just not go there.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at too.
He has no touchdowns on the year, which does kind of imply some regression, but it also kind of fits with what his role is.
And he's had double-digit FanDuel points a couple of times with no touchdowns, which is really encouraging. That's kind of what I want out of a running back. But like
40 plus receiving yard, 37 plus in like 5 of the past 6.
Like I think that he's not totally out of consideration, but realistically, is J.D. McKissick going to win you a tournament? Probably not. So I think that it helps he's facing Detroit. Like you can do a lot of good stuff against Detroit, but I know that Alex Smith will throw him the ball more often because he is check down king, but is he going to generate touchdown drives? Like we said on Monday, I feel worse about this offense with Alex Smith than I do about Kyle Allen, and I'm not a big Kyle Allen guy, so that would be my concern there. The Dolphins placed Preston Williams on injured reserve due to his injury from week 9. We love Preston Williams, so that stinks. They have a matchup with the Chargers this week, and they have some tough corners, but how are you handling Devontae Parker and others?
Parker, I think you nailed it with the difficult matchup. I mean, Tua showed more last week than he did in his first start, but still just 28 pass attempts. Parker's 6,000. That's not necessarily. I mean, it's not. He's not oversalaried, but it's not like a value salary. I would be more inclined, I think, to go with Mike Gesicki at 5,300 to fill the tight end slot. He's got a 13.5-yard ADOT from Tua on 6 targets, but even before that, I was at like 11.3 or so. So I still think that Gesicki might be my preferred route.
I'm pretty sure Gesicki's a never getting for me. I've lost so much money on him this year.
I understand it.
Yeah, I think that even though the matchup is tough for Devontae Parker, I still like it. He saw some tough matchups last week too with Patrick Peterson, but he was still fine. So I think I do like Devontae Parker this week quite a bit at 6,000. I'd rank him above Gesicki from a prioritization perspective, and I think that Parker will be like a borderline core play for me. Like I'm not going to actively, because I can't make him a core play when I'm stacking other games, especially the guys in that range, Christian Kirk above him, John Brown below him. But like I will have enough Devontae Parker to benefit. I think that's the way I'll think.
Yeah, and I will say, I feel like you and I are both going to be in on this, but if you're playing Kamara, Jones, and Miles Sanders, you're going to be around the 6,000 range for your receivers.
I am.
So Parker, I will have more Parker than I probably want to, but it's not because I hate him. You're just a little higher on him than I am.
Okay, cool. The other side of that game, Justin Jackson, sounds like he's likely to sit for the Chargers. That would seemingly lead to a lot of Kalen Ballage, but Tremaine Pope got a lot of run in week 8, and he's now cleared concussion protocol. So I'm inclined to avoid this backfield. Are you in the same boat there?
Yeah, I mean, we have better value spots, and again, playing Kalen Ballage when you can just – I know the salaries are different, but when you can play
it's
Alvin
a revenge
Kamara,
game. Let us not overlook this.
Yeah, I know, but I don't think that's a long-term winning strategy.
No, I agree. The Seahawks were again without Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde in practice on Wednesday. It was a full-blown committee in week 9 without those two because Alex Collins mixed in with Travis Homer and DJ Dallas, so we're good to ignore it, right?
Yeah, Dallas had appeal just from volume. He wasn't efficient when he had that big game. So if he doesn't have that, then no.
Cool. Other side of that game, Darrell Henderson missed practice Wednesday. Sounded initially like he'd be good to go this week, so I still feel like he's probably gonna play. But this now puts that kind of up in the air. We'll talk about the passing game here in the trend section, but let's assume that Henderson sits just for poops and gigs. Would you go at either Malcolm Brown or Cam Akers there?
Not Cam Akers. We most recently saw them run 92 plays, and I think Cam Akers had like 11 opportunities.
That was with Henderson like getting hurt decently early.
I think Akers was at 21% of the snaps. Despite that, Malcolm Brown played 60% because I recapped that game. I would be open to Brown, not Akers, unless we see something different from him.
Yeah, Brown is $5,500. He's had the goal line work pretty much all year long, and he's gotten targets at times too. So if there's no Henderson, I think that I'd be open to Brown, but he wouldn't be a massive priority. But like, again, I'm looking for low salary exposure to these games. He would be that. So
yeah, and although I mean, look, if you're limited, you want your backs to have potential goal line roles and
you want the high
work.
leverage touches. Yeah.
So he might be he could be one of the better value backs, despite not playing 80% of the snaps. He might be even more appealing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's move into our trends discussion now for week number 10, starting off with one of those shootouts. Brandon, you're going to talk about the Arizona offense of late because they've been a different offense recently. They're actually throwing the ball downfield, which is pretty weird. We're going to talk about that, and then I'm going to talk about this game in general from a stacking perspective. So start me off here with the headliner, talking about Arizona here.
Yeah, so Arizona is probably just one of everyone's favorite DFS offenses, and whenever you throw them into a game against the Bills with a really high total, it's worth digging into. I want to dig into their splits since Christian Kirk's return. I think this is the de facto top game of the week for probably everybody. We dug into the Bills last week for their matchup with Seattle. This week, I'm going to be looking, like I said, at the Cardinals instead. It starts at the top with Kyler Murray, who is salaried at $8,800 on FanDuel, which is just $100 off the mark of Russell Wilson, but I think it's justified. Kyler started this season off fairly slowly as a passer, but according to numberFire's passing net expected points metric, he has 4+ games in a row in terms of per drop back expected points added. In that span, he's at 0.31 passing net expected points per drop back. The NFL average on the full season is 0.14. So he's more than double that. That's really what you want to see. You want passing efficiency from your quarterbacks. And Buffalo is just 21st in adjusted pass defense based on numberFire's metrics. So no issues there with Kyler, especially with all of the rushing he gets you. Eventually, he's not going to run for a touchdown, but I still think that there's enough where we don't need to talk ourselves out of Kyler. What's more interesting to me is that there's been a bit of a shift as far as the pass catchers go. Christian Kirk has been more involved over the past 5 games since returning from injury. And in that sample, DeAndre Hopkins is down, I want to say, to a 24% target share, which still leads the team. It's 8 targets per game. It's not bad by any means, but it's not elite. And last week you mentioned in passing that he didn't really get a lot of targets, but I think there were 4 pass interference penalties called against him. So it could have been a little bit better, but even still, it's safe to say that DeAndre Hopkins is closer to 25% target share than 30%. Tre'Davious White did not practice Wednesday, which is a big factor here for me. I don't think that I would avoid Hopkins entirely if White goes, but it's definitely going to help if White were to sit. But in this sample as well, Christian Kirk's at 19% of the targets. That's 6.2 targets per game, but 1.4 downfield targets per game, an average depth of target of 11.8 yards downfield. By contrast, Hopkins is at 1.6 targets downfield. So that's about the same, but his ADOT's a little bit shallower. About 2.5 yards, that is. So it's not to say that Christian Kirk is better than Hopkins, but when you factor in price and role and expectation, I think Christian Kirk's definitely a DFS factor, and I love that because I love Christian Kirk. We could have value in the backfield depending on Kenny Drake's status. We don't need to really talk too much about Chase Edmonds if Kenny Drake weren't playing, but this offense could have 4 go-to DFS options. especially with Kyler, Kirk, Hopkins, and then maybe one of the running backs. So, is this your favorite offense of the week? Do you like Kirk over Hopkins at the salary? Any read? We talked about the backfield, so I won't ask you again. But where are you with like Kirk and Kyler this week?
I think that Kyler is 1, Josh Allen 2 within the slate, like of all quarterbacks. I also don't think that's a contrarian take by any means. I would assume they'll be the 2 most popular, right?
They should be. I run simulations, and they combined for like a 26 to 27% chance to be the QB1 on the main slate. So,
That's awesome.
It just seems like everyone will be on this game, but it's justified, and that's a little bit scary. But quarterbacks are very rarely rostered on like 15% of lineups or more. It's usually really flat at quarterback, so I don't want us to be concerned about that.
Well, I think the other thing too is that it's less concerning. There are fewer paths to failure in this game than Rams Seahawks, I think. I like Rams Seahawks, but I think there are fewer paths to failure here. So I would say this one is my number 1 game to stack. I would say Kyler's my number 1 quarterback. I think that Christian Kirk, like regardless of whether Tre'Davious White plays, is a good option. I know people make fun of cornerback matchups and like they are overrated, but objectively, having one less really talented cornerback out there is a good thing for everyone. So, like, we shouldn't overvalue them, but they do matter to the extent that it would benefit the Cardinals if a good player is not playing for the opposing team. Don't get too crazy about things. So I would say Hopkins is in play regardless. He gets a slight bump up if there's no Tre'Davious White, but I think I might go Kirk either way just because I love the downfield work that he's getting, and I love that Kyler's actually hitting him downfield, which is really intriguing. So I think that that's enough for me to like Kirk a lot at $6,300. Like if I'm let's say I have 10 Christian or 10 Kyler Murray lineups, I'm probably still having more Hopkins than Kirk. But like it's a 6-4 split as opposed to like a 8-2 split, which would have been earlier in the year, if that makes sense.
It does. I think I'll probably still be on Kirk more just because of the salary and how I want to build around the running backs. But I mean,
sorry, my bad. I would also say if I have one lineup, I'm going Kirk, just because I know the running backs I want to use in that one lineup don't allow me to use Hopkins. So,
yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah,
like yes, in a vacuum, you want DeAndre Hopkins and not Christian Kirk, but considering everything, it's going to be hard to get to Hopkins a ton, especially if you are, giving Kyler 8,800 to be on your lineup. So I think that will probably be a little bit, dare I say, contrarian. Although if the value backs really do draw a lot of popularity away, someone like Hopkins could be fairly chalky. So we'll have to kind of wait and see. It's been hard to get a read on stuff. I feel like throughout the week, there's been an extra eye on the Masters. So it's been a little bit less about the NFL so far. And I think we'll get more information, Thursday, Friday about where popularity is kind of trending.
Where are you at with the Bills offense? Because I think that John Brown is the best value on the entire slate, regardless of position at $5,600. I think that Brown, a revenge game, by the way. We've got a lot of revenge games this week. That doesn't matter. I just like his role. I like his salary. I like the exposure he gets me to this game. So if I'm focusing on low salary exposure to great games, Christian Kirk and John Brown fit that to perfection. Right now, I will say in my default lineup, they're both in there as part of a game stack. So where do you sit with the Bills offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best part about this game is we know how to stack it.
Correct.
Yes, Josh Allen can throw touchdowns to kind of anybody and can be very tilting. But overall, the volume is going to go to Stephon Diggs and John Brown. And then on the other side, DeAndre Hopkins and Christian Kirk for the most part. So I think the Bills are just about every bit as intriguing. It's really just the quarterback, a stud receiver, a value receiver, and like nobody else. So I kind of view them almost equally. I don't really have a preference. And I'll play a lot of all 6 of those guys.
You have one game stack here. What is it?
It's going to be Kyler because I believe in the rushing more. And then I might try to do something like Kirk and Diggs because as much as we love John Brown, I know Stephon Diggs like Christian. This will feel weird, but like Christian Kirk has a ceiling that's kind of close maybe to DeAndre because DeAndre's not getting like 17 targets.
Yeah.
I think John Brown doesn't really have the same ceiling as Stephon Diggs.
It's probably fair. Okay. I would go Kyler, Kirk, Brown just because of the running backs. So, but like, I can't blame you. Stephon Diggs.
I mean, I'm going to do that more. I just, I wanted to give out something other than
Diggs is amazing. I can't push back on that at all. Let's talk about the other game to stack here on this slate. That's the Rams versus the Seahawks. The Seahawks offense, like we know how to handle it. You go Russ, you go Lockett, you go Metcalf, and you don't overthink it. You do not use Will Disley. Don't ever do it.
Just Metcalf over Lockett, or did you list them in that reason or that order for a reason?
I don't know.
That's always
I'll ask you about that.
Okay, all right.
Because I'm going to have you talk me through it. This is just one of those games that I want to stack. And so let's talk about the Rams here because we haven't been on the main slate very often with them. So let's talk about the Rams. The most relevant sample for the pass catchers is from week 3 on because in the first 2 games, Van Jefferson got quite a bit of run. His role has decreased since then, which has given Josh Reynolds a bigger piece of the pie. So I think that's the most relevant sample. And Reynolds has been relevant in that time. But Cooper Kupp has been the guy. He has 28% of the team's targets from week 3 on. Robert Woods has 19%. Josh Reynolds has 16%. So actually not that far behind Woods. Woods, though, does have 24% of the red zone targets. He also gets red zone carries and just overall carries. So obviously you prefer Woods, but comparable at least. Kupp is at 26% of the downfield targets. Reynolds at 29%. Woods 32%. So that's interesting because all 3 are viable. Nobody's really pulled away. Nobody's dominating the high leverage targets like we see with the Vikings in Justin Jefferson and now Adam Thielen, but all of them are getting high leverage look, which I think is helpful here. A lot of that usage for Kupp came from his 20 target game in week 8, but his share is still 24% if you omit that game compared to 21% for Woods. So even if you throw that game out, it still does favor Cooper Kupp. Kupp has gone over 100 yards receiving twice in this span. He's $7,700, but I think he's worth it here, and I'm not a Cooper Kupp guy at all, actively against Cooper Kupp. But here I'm in. Woods is a really quality second option at $7,200. He doesn't have the overall targets, but he gets rush attempts. He gets high leverage, downfield targets 32% of the time. So I'm going to put him a firm second, but we'll have Kupp number 1. As for Reynolds, he's just $5,000, and that's low enough for me to filter him in as a value play. His max is 60 receiving yards, so keep that in mind. But they face some really tough outside corners in this span. They don't get that here. So it might be a bit of a leap of faith to go Josh Reynolds, but for $5,000, I think he could do worse. We always talk about 85 yards or 2 touchdowns. I don't think the 2 touchdown aspect of that discussion is out of play for Josh Reynolds. As for Jared Goff, he's in play. He's hard to prioritize given the lack of rushing, given Kyler, Allen, Wilson, Watson, all those guys are better options. But I do think that we can at least consider Goff because from week 3 on, the Rams have thrown 54% of the time on early downs in the first half. That ranks 17th in the league. It is less run heavy than they were the first 2 weeks, but it's still not really ideal. Goff has gotten to 28 FanDuel points this year, so he can show a ceiling, especially against a hideous pass rush. I just prefer the guys with rushing like Kyler, Allen, etc. So to me, the big fish for the Rams is Cooper Kupp. I'm good at going with Josh Reynolds as a value play, but everyone in the passing game here is at least viable for stacks. So Brandon, how about you? How are you viewing the Rams here? Specifically, am I off base in talking about Josh Reynolds?
No, I think Reynolds makes sense for the downfield work. The question is, can he get enough volume and convert? On the limited down. I mean, I have him at 2.2 downfield targets per game since week 3. I don't know if you said that. Was digging into some other stuff, but I think Josh Reynolds is definitely in play for going to stack this game, especially at that salary. He opens up a lot. He feels like one of those plays where if you're building lineups by hand, you can kind of leave him plugged in, and when you maybe duplicate your lineups, you're like, well, these lineups look great, and then you realize you have 40% Josh Reynolds. So that's one thing I would warn against, but that might just be only me who's dumb enough to do that kind of stuff. But I think Reynolds makes sense, but between Cup and Woods, I would go Cup as well. I like
Okay.
the target share better, and he is underperforming. And this is somewhat based on usage, but he is underperforming in the touchdown column. He hasn't scored in I think 4 straight games now. Woods is overperforming there, so anytime I can get the player with more volume and expected touchdown regression in his favor, I will side with that. As much as we generally don't play Cooper Kupp, I think I would rank Kupp over Woods.
Yeah, I'm a firm Cooper Cup hater, but still in. What about the Seahawks side here? Metcalf, Lockett. Which way you going this week?
It's always kind of both, but it's DK Metcalf. I think that you can't really look. There's a salary difference, but if you're asking me straight up, if you can play one, it's going to be DK Metcalf. Per target, his expected points numbers are significantly better than Tyler Lockett's, and somehow Metcalf is like underperforming based on how efficient he's been. I wrote up regression candidates on numberFire this week, and Metcalf was one who stood out as someone who should have more fantasy points somehow, and Tyler Lockett someone who's overperformed just because
he have more?
just because of the discrepancy of how efficient he's been, and because it makes sense because we know he gets 3 downfield targets per game. He's at 23% of targets. Lockett's at 24% and basically half as many downfield targets. Like, you're getting similar volume, but we know that DK Metcalf gets high leverage looks. Tyler Lockett still gets downfield work, almost had a bunch of touchdowns, it feels like, last week, but Metcalf is the one to prioritize.
I still think that Lockett is like very, very viable because he gets the downfield work. He's probably going to see a little bit less Jalen Ramsey, so that's beneficial. But like, you're right. Like, if you have one shot at these guys, it's pretty much got to be Metcalf unless it's an extreme situation. So I'm right there with you on the same page. Lockett is a $900 discount, but it's still DK Metcalf. So pretty fun game there. And you're in agreement that this game is below Bills Cardinals, correct?
Yeah. Anytime I get kind of 2 games that are somewhat similar and it is a divisional game, I will always side with the one that's not a divisional game.
Yeah, it helps that this is not a repeat matchup yet.
But
overall,
the
Rams actually have like 2 matchups with the Seahawks and 2 with the Cardinals left. So my boy Jared Goff about to rack up them expected points, baby. Let's move now to your second trend and talk about the Houston Texans, because outside of those top 2, as long as the weather obliges, it seems like the Houston-Cleveland game is pretty enticing, and Houston does not have potentially may not have David Johnson. So it's worth looking into this Texans offense, seeing what we can suss out. What are you seeing with them, Brandon?
Yeah, so I think, I'll get into this, but I think Houston's offense is very easy to overlook because of the 4 that we've already touched on in the trend section. But, whether we get David Johnson or not, I think that Houston is an offense that we should all kind of like against the Browns. Cleveland is 27th in adjusted defense based on numberFire's metrics, 28th in both adjusted passing and rushing defense. So can't ask for a whole lot more. And Deshaun Watson has just been really good, especially whenever you remove all those tough games from the start of the season, which feels like a year ago at this point. But they were having tough matchup after tough matchup. And he's had 4 games now against bottom half adjusted pass defenses. He's at 0.42 passing net expected points per dropback, which is literally 3 times the NFL average. So you should expect big things. You want efficiency from your quarterbacks. You don't necessarily want or need volume. You want that efficiency. And in those 4 games, he's averaged 319 passing yards and 2.8 touchdowns. So, that's very much appealing, especially if we're going to get Deshaun Watson as kind of a little bit of an afterthought compared to the other quarterbacks that we just discussed. And in those 4 games, it's led to good numbers for the receivers too. Brandon Cooks leads the team with 24% of the targets, which is 8.3 per game, 1.8 downfield targets per game. Will Fuller's close behind at 23%, 7.8 targets per game, but 2.5 downfield targets per game, an average target depth of almost 14 yards. So, it's kind of like a light version of the Seahawks where the target shares are very similar, but Fuller is the DK Metcalf here with the more downfield work, the higher ADOTs to separate them. It's reflected in their salaries. Their salaries are basically like 2,000 different for each of them or whatever. But I think that this is a really enticing spot for both of them. Now, Fuller has scored in 6 straight games, but is only 1.5 scores above expectation based on his receiving yardage. So it's not like it's totally unsustainable, but he could step back there. We talked about him being good on Monday's podcast, being good even if you kind of remove the touchdown. So it's very enticing for Will Fuller. But Cooks is about a half a score low in the touchdown column from where he should be. But again, they're both just really efficient in these games against below average defenses. And, if we have to dig into the backfield, look, I think Duke Johnson is a little bit of a trap. Last week, he played 81% of snaps, had 16 carries and 4 targets, but on the season, he's been less efficient than David Johnson on the full season, just less efficient than David Johnson, who already was kind of at best league average, but a little bit below that. So, he had the volume.
He was really bad.
Wasn't good. Duke Johnson's been worse. So I don't really want to chase Duke Johnson. I kind of out of obligation have him as a player pick, but I think I'll probably talk myself out of it by the time we get there. But is this another week where we're just in on Watson, Fuller, and Cooks? Can we run it back? How are you feeling here?
I think we can run it back. I think we can run it back with Jarvis Landry because he got disgusting volume in their one game without Odell Beckham. I also like Austin Hooper at $5,100. So I think we can run it back very easily. We know how to do so. On the Houston side, I agree fully with what you said. Fuller is amazing despite the potential touchdown regression. You could argue he has upward regression in the yardage department because of how good he is. So I actually don't mind too much. He can pay off without a touchdown. That's how good he is. I think that's really intriguing. So I agree with you. Fuller is worth it despite the touchdown regression. Cooks, lower salary way to get exposure to a good game. That's what I want. So I think it's still Fuller 1, Cooks 2, like you said. Fully agree there. I think that Watson, if the weather obliges, which we'll talk about in the weather section, it looks kind of gross. I would say that Watson might be number 3. Now, I should put Russ higher, I think. It's the salary that kind of scares me. I'm probably going to put Russ 3.
600 can go a long way, though. Even 200 can go a long way this week.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll wind up going Russ 3, but Watson's in that discussion. Whereas I think the top 2 are set. 3 is up in the air, and those 2 are in that discussion for number 3. As far as Duke goes, the reason that I am hesitant is that how many times have we seen coaches have the opportunity to give Duke Johnson work and not done so? Last week, the guys who were active for them were David Johnson, Duke Johnson, Buddy Howell was a special teams guy and a fullback. Buddy Howell got work for the first time in his career as a running back because David Johnson was out. Now Scotty Phillips, who's on their practice squad, an undrafted free agent, is, I would assume, going to get promoted. My concern with Duke Johnson is that they're going to give Phillips some run and see what he can do. Because they have no incentive to win. They have no incentive to tank because they don't have a first-round pick, but they don't have a lot of incentive to win either. You should see what your younger players have, and I think they're going to do that eventually. So if you guaranteed me 81% snap rate for Duke, cool, I'm in. I can't guarantee that, though. So that combined with the inability of David Johnson to generate a ceiling game, I think kind of makes me pretty low on Duke. So that's why I'm concerned there. I don't know. Maybe I'm over concerned about a practice squad player, an undrafted free agent practice squad player.
I mean, it makes sense. When you get down to it, Duke Johnson should still probably, unless practice squad players really carve out a significant role, you should probably play about 70% of the snaps, handle significant or 10 to 12 carries, but we're more interested in the targets anyway. Duke Johnson should be able to get targets. We like the game overall. It is a revenge game. But I think you make the case that per dollar, he is a fine value. It's just the ceiling. And just not a lot of running backs project for a predictable, safe, like certain path to a ceiling.
Yeah. And I think that's a legit concern because we talked about this earlier in the year. Even value running backs in perfect lineups score at least 20 points. No one has scored fewer than 20 points since the start of 2019. So, like, you need 20 points. David Johnson's max is 18.7. He didn't do a lot when Duke was out even. So, like, I don't know. Snaps are just worth less in this backfield. And I think that's important to note. Let's move on here to the Philadelphia Eagles because the total for this game is low at 44.5, and usually I just cross it off because I hate games with low totals, especially in 2020, and I usually don't want to go there. But I think it's more appealing than the total would say. I actually like the over here quite a bit. We'll talk about that on covering the spread later, but the big reason why I like the total here is that the Eagles are getting healthier. They had both Lane Johnson and Isaac Seumalo at practice on Wednesday. Johnson should play. I feel pretty good about that. Seumalo is iffier because he's been on IR since week 2. But if he does play, that'd be a big upgrade for this Eagles offense because they've played just 25 snaps all year with both Lane Johnson and Seumalo on the field. They got both Jalen Reagor and Dallas Goedert back before the bye, and it looks like Miles Sanders should be back this week too. He practiced Wednesday. So outside of Deshaun Jackson, they're potentially the healthiest they've been all year. And they get that just in time to face the 23rd ranked overall defense. So it might be time to get back in on the Eagles. And I think the best route for doing so is Miles Sanders. He has played 4 full games this year. In those games, he is averaging 27 adjusted opportunities per game. That's a really good number straight up, but it's especially good at $7,700 on a slate where we don't have a lot of high ceiling running backs. The Giants are 9th in success rate allowed to opposing running backs. They tend to prioritize run stuffers for whatever reason. So they're good against the rush, but not prohibitively so. I think that Sanders is a top tier tournament option for this week, like a core play, firm core play. The passing offense is at least live, I think is the way I'd phrase it. With Goddard and Reagor back in week 8, they both played full roles. Travis Fulgham did still lead the team with 7 targets. 2 of those were deep. That was while dealing with some coverage from Trevon Diggs. And that's important because he could see James Bradberry this weekend, who is obviously really good. Bradberry shadowed Deshaun Jackson in week 7, but D-Jax won't be here. So I think that Fulgham isn't a guy I'm going to go out in cash games because I think that there are better options, but I think that he's firmly on the tournament radar at in the high 6,000s. Reagor is $5,600. Goddard is $58,000. I prefer Goddard between the two. Goddard had just 1 target in week 8, but he played a ton of snaps. He also led this team in targets in weeks 1 and 2, or overall between weeks 1 and 2. He had a couple of deep targets there. Not my favorite tight end. I prefer Austin Hooper, who's a little bit cheaper, but I think that Goddard's definitely up there. Reagor is a tournament option, and one I'd grade below John Brown and potentially Jerry Jeudy if he's healthy enough, but I'm going to at least have shares due to what I would expect should be a pretty good game for the Eagles offense. So, Brandon, we know Carson Wentz has been pure trash for the full season. So am I being overly optimistic in going at this team? What's your read on Philly here?
No, I don't think. I think you're right to be optimistic, especially. Look, I think Miles Sanders is, again, top 3 running back play. I'm probably going to have 2 of Kamara, Jones, and Sanders, and if not 3, but I'll probably have 2 in just about every lineup. It feels like. Yeah. So Sanders, I think, doesn't need a whole lot of conversation just because of what his role is. But I think the main reason you can be optimistic here is the salaries, aside from Fulgham, are viable because you mentioned Jalen Reagor and Dallas Goedert. I think they're both very much in play at their salaries. So I think with that being – and yes, like it's a divisional rematch, but there was no – Jalen Reagor, no Miles Sanders.
And they are not dependent on efficiency.
So I think that we have 3 Eagles in play with Sanders, Reagor, and Dallas Goedert. I don't think I can justify Fulgham at 6,800.
I would also say this is a game I'm willing to stack if I have, like, let's say 50 lineups, I would have stacks of this game just because I think there's a path to it being kind of fun. Go Wentz, Sanders, and then Goddard maybe, or Fulgham, and then run it back with Sterling Shepard. I think that's an option. And one that I am
for my boy, Evan Ingram.
Well, I said Goddard. I'm not going to double tight end this. I'm not that big of a
yeah, but
donkey.
I
have no love for Evan Ingram. I'm not going to
27% target share in 3 games with Sterling Shepard.
How many of those have been catchable? None.
How many?
Not one. He caught one that was not catchable because he's a good player. But he is actually getting downfield work now, which he was not. So that's
7 per game in that sample.
He's no longer Jason Witten, so that's good. I'll take that. I like him more than I did before, but I'd prioritize Goddard. I prioritize Austin Hooper. So, Gronk's like 61. I'd rather have Gronk than what? Gronk is a quarterback who will throw him the ball within 15 yards of him.
I do like
He's not Jason. Gronk is being used in a more athletic way right now than Evan Ingram, which depresses the ever-loving poo out of me.
Did we go over their health, the Bucs?
No.
Because Gronk he ran 20 pass routes last week.
Yeah, because they got blasted.
Yeah, but Chris Godwin ran 43, Mike Evans ran 40, Antonio Brown ran 36, Gronk ran 20. I don't want to hear that was the only reason. Because Gronk was trending up, his salary went up. Then I think you can argue that he's not going to be quite the same now that they have Antonio Brown. So
he still has more deep targets than Mike Evans.
Yeah, that's fine. I know it's fun to pick on Mike Evans at this point, but I think Gronkowski's not worth that salary. It's not to say I won't use him at all, but I think he is kind of an outlier with where his salary is from what his role might be moving forward.
Do you want to make a bet on Ingram versus Gronk this week?
Not particularly, no. But I would.
Okay, well.
Do you think I'm off base in saying that Gronkowski might scale back from what he was with Antonio Brown injected into that offense?
I mean, probably, but who cares? I don't know.
Yeah, but you can't just.
I can say no. That's the justification for everything. It's tight end. Who cares? That's
but
answer.
you can't just pretend just play anyone down there. Gronk. It's like he's 61, and some of these other guys are like 56, 51 for Hooper. I think.
Yeah, I'd rather go Hooper. I mean, that's not debating. I'm not talking about Hooper. I'm talking about Ingram. I'd rather have Hooper. That's easy for me. I'd rather have Hooper.
Okay.
Anyway, we'll take a look at what bookmakers are saying here in just 1 second. But first, betting on the NFL is great. Betting on the NFL risk-free is even better. FanDuel Sportsbook is giving you a chance to bet on Week 10 of the NFL risk-free with their exclusive same-game parlays. Simply place a 3-leg or more parlay on any NFL Week 10 game to be eligible. If you don't bet, or if you don't win your bet, if you don't bet, they're not going to refund you at all. If you don't win your bet, FanDuel will refund your bet up to $10 in site credit. What do you have to lose? Must be 21 plus and present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, West Virginia, Indiana, Colorado, Iowa, or Tennessee. Refund issues a non-drawable site credit that expires in 7 days. Max refund $10. Terms apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In Indiana, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. In Iowa, call 1-800-BETS-OFF. Or in Tennessee, call the Tennessee Red Line. Let's take a look at what bookmakers are saying about this slate, starting off with the highest total we have not yet discussed. That is in Las Vegas for the Raiders and the Broncos. It's at 51.5 at FanDuel Sportsbook. That is down a point from where it opened, but there is a lot of money now on the over here. So, Brandon, are you looking to stack this game, or does the Broncos offense worry you enough where you don't think it'll stay close?
Why would the Broncos offense worry me?
We've had extra weeks of data, dude. I can change my opinion.
Come on. I mean,
I can change my opinion as time goes on.
You should change your opinion when you come
I've got more information, and that information has not been favorable for my boy Drew Lock.
And so it's, that's fine. I would rank this game 5th for me. Okay. Are we talking about? Yeah, we're talking about it 4th. The game I would rank above it that we haven't talked about. I think for me, there are just paths to this game failing. Yes. I think there are paths to this game, with Derek Carr throwing touchdowns to anybody. I like Jerry Jeudy a lot, but if he's not healthy, then that's a problem. Their market shares as is. I mean, he leads whenever they have everyone healthy. He leads with 21%, so it's not like they really pepper anybody. I think the most intriguing plays in this game both come from the Raiders, though, with Darren Waller. Just relative to all the other tight ends, his salary is $7,000. He's not very easy to get to. I think you could probably lump him into like that Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins discussion that I had at the top. If we want to spend up at running back, is Darren Waller going to go overlooked? And he should have the highest floor, relatively highest ceiling for tight ends, but I don't know how much I'll actually have of him, and that's a little bit scary. I think the other most intriguing play here is Josh Jacobs, who was not healthy last week, did not play a lot, but seems healthier this week. And I think he could go a little bit overlooked. Not that he's my favorite play in the 7,000 range of running back, but I think he might just be kind of forgotten about.
I agree. Josh Jacobs was not on the injury report on Wednesday. There have been 2 weeks the entire year where he was not listed at all. Weeks 1 and week 7. He didn't do a lot in week 7 because it was against the Bucs, but he went berserk in week 1. And that matters because when he's not healthy, it seems like he loses that passing game work to Devontae Booker, who played really well in week 9. So it's justified, but it's a concern for daily fantasy. So I think that Jacobs is I think that he's like a secondary option. Like after I get enough of Miles Sanders, right, Aaron Jones, and Alvin Kamara, where I feel good, I'll go to Josh Jacobs next as like a second tier type guy.
Yeah, he might be he and probably James Robinson, despite being a big underdog, I think would be the places I would feel most comfortable with outside the top 3 at this point, salary considered, which might be dumb, but that's where I am at this point.
Unless Kenyon Drake sits, then it would be Chase Edmonds.
I'm assuming Drake plays, but if Drake's out, then yeah.
I think that might be right. I'm a little bit lower on James Robinson just because
I understand.
As much as I love to joke about Jake Luton, but I think that Waller is someone I want to make sure I get some of just because the workload is so good. But I'm going to realistically, I'm not going to have as much as I have as Austin Hooper and stuff. So, right. I think that I'm on the same page here. Mini stacks. I think this is a 0 quarterback game, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Derek Carr is more in play than he has been.
Yes.
But if I'm going to use a guy with a semi-questionable ceiling, I'll just go Goff. I think that's more realistic for me. The team with the highest team total on the board is the Packers at 31.5. They are 12.5 point favorites against the Jaguars. What is encouraging, though, is that the spread is tightened. It opened at 14. It's now 12.5. Again, people realize that Jake Luton is a quarterback upgrade. I get very wary of teams who are this heavily favored, specifically the passing game pieces. So maybe it's hypocritical of me, but I do like Aaron Jones at $8,900. I don't know, maybe that's going. I know it's not outrageous. I know that that's very much the consensus read on this game. I just know that I'm also being hypocritical at the same time because I don't like teams that are heavily favored. So how are you viewing the Packers here against the Jaguars?
Yeah, that's the big kind of question is, do you think this game stays close? Because we've gone over it numerous times throughout the year, but teams that are just big favorites don't really, they can hit their ceiling, individual players, but they more kind of play to their projection rather than kind of have significantly huge games. But I think that the conversation that we really have to have is if the Packers put up 31.5 points, not that they, I would love to see how they do that, but if they get to their implied team total, I don't know if you seemed a little confused. I meant specifically the half point. I didn't want to lose you to say that maybe I don't know how they get to 31 points, but it's going to be through Aaron Jones. It's going to be through Devontae Adams if they can throw. So it's going to be Aaron Jones for the most part, and I think that's what makes me feel really good because there aren't many spots this week at running back where anybody has anything close to Aaron Jones' workload. Even in a blowout last week, he had 15 carries and 5 targets, I believe. And
he was in the game late, which was pretty dumb. But he was there
because I had Tyler Ervin.
I know that there was no Jamal.
Yeah. I had a lot of Tyler Ervin. I was like, just look, the game's over. Get Aaron Jones out. Give Tyler Ervin some checkdowns, and it's like Aaron Jones is still out there, so he must be pretty healthy. And that was 10 days ago, so he's got extra time to rest.
Right. And it also might be enough to get Brian Bulaga, David Bakhtiari. I'm thinking they're old right tackle. David Bakhtiari back, which would be good for everyone. So I think that Aaron Jones below Kamara, right?
Yeah. Jones is the one.
Like, we're going both a lot of the time, but
yeah.
Okay. Second highest, any ancillary pieces here? Alan Lazard probably going to be back, but he's $5,700. I was shocked when I looked up his salary. I thought it'd be $5,000. He's not. Any ancillary pieces here, or just the main guys?
I mean, Lazard is a little bit interesting if you think this game stays close, but if you don't, I don't think that there's enough to go around for anyone other than the main guys for the Packers.
Okay. Second highest total on the slate is the New Orleans Saints. They're at 29.5 at home against the 49ers. The total in that game has come down 1.5 points since open, and the spread has bounced back and forth between 9 and 9.5. The Saints are healthy, which is good. The 49ers are not. So how are you viewing this game?
So I kind of was harsh on Drew Brees on Monday, just from I don't see the need to play him. But once you get outside the top 2, 4, like 6 quarterbacks this week, there's not a whole lot that intrigues me. So I think Drew Brees does, so long as he's healthy. I'm trending up on Drew Brees. He's been very efficient. He has Michael Thomas back. Michael Thomas had just 22% of the targets in the first half before that game got really out of hand, although it was kind of out of hand from the get-go. So that's a little bit concerning, but I think Drew Brees is interesting. I think we're both on the same page where Kamara is the RB1. But other than that, like I'm not going to play Michael Thomas. I didn't see enough last week. You can't go to any other Saints, really, with how they distribute the ball. And then for the 49ers, I don't really know what we're going to get from their skill position players.
I actually don't hate Michael Thomas, and I generally do. Like, he's kind of like Cooper Kupp to me this week, where usually I'm like really hesitant to play him, but I'm not as hesitant this week, just because I don't think anyone's going to use him,
That's
even
true.
though they're facing a non-threatening opponent. Like, the 49ers are still been good. Kudos to them. They've been amazing, considering the injuries they've had, but like, they're not a threatening defense anymore. No one's going to use him. $8,500 at home. You don't have to play, but I want to actively try to be overweight.
Yeah, so that's not even like a galaxy brain play. Like, that's a really smart play. It's just,
this is like you with Kyler Murray against the Jets. Like, we're not stretching super thin here, but like, it's still someone who should be fairly unpopular.
Yeah, I mean, look, not every receiver on the board, especially at the top, is going to be very popular. Some of these guys are going to go under the radar. Thomas is, at this point, I would say, among the 4 who are above 8,000, Thomas will be the least popular. We know what his upside is. It just comes from volume. I don't know what the health is because he was out for so long, and this is a bias, but it's not just been the ankle. It's been some other stuff, and I don't know if that's going to factor in. And so I really was curious to see what his target share would be in that first game back, regardless of what the results were. It was only, like I said, 22% in the first half to try to adjust for things. So Michael Thomas, with how he gets his targets, which is not all downfield, kind of need him at like a 30% target share, which I'm not saying he won't get, but that was my concern. But I think you're absolutely right. Michael Thomas makes a ton of sense for tournaments.
So I think I want to get overweight on him, but like, overweight is probably like 20%, and like, I'm fine with that. I think that's an okay number.
Yeah.
But I think it's really about Kamara here, especially with how popular Kamara will be. No one's going to use Thomas, and like, I don't tend to play things like that often, but I think I will here. What about the other side? I am at least intrigued by Jerick McKinnon. I think that he might be my favorite value running back. Played 74% of the snaps in that blowout in week 9. He didn't, he lucked out. He should not have done what he did from a fantasy perspective in that game, but he was the lead back over JaMychal Hasty, even when that game was semi-competitive in the first half. I think it was 6 carries and 1 target for Jerick compared to 3 and 1 for Hasty. So I kind of think that Jarek's my number one guy among the value running backs. And I feel like I might be a donkey for that. But what about you on the 49ers side of things?
No, I think Jarek is viable. He has a nose for the touchdown, or for the end zone, I should say, with his touchdown ability. Sorry, I'm looking at
a touchdown. I'll smell a touchdown.
And you mentioned the snap rate of 74% last week. It stood out to me the week before where he still played 50% of the snaps. And look, like he's not somebody who can't get targets. He's had 4 the past 2 games. So again, we're talking about guys who was at Malcolm Brown, where he's in play for touchdowns. He should get some targets. He's apparently going to be on the field quite a bit. So I think McKinnon makes a lot of sense, and he might be. At this point, I think I might be with you. And I don't think people will really talk about him with Mike Davis and Duke Johnson, such early week knowns at this point.
Okay, so we're talking about the Panthers game next. So I'll leave that value discussion for that. But anyone else in the 49ers? Or are we okay? Just kind of.
What's
I was looking
status?
I will admit that I looked at Jordan Reed's salary. I saw it was $5,000. Vomited and closed the tab. Didn't even like on search his name. I closed the tab, so I can't go there. Anything else?
So Ayuk didn't get to play Thursday,
right?
But he's been good. They get him involved. The problem is the salary of $6,500. I think that's a little high for what I expect from this offense. So he would be the number one place I would go to bring it back. Although, I mean, Kamara, Jarek stacks, like people don't really seem to like the idea of playing running backs against each other, but I think that would be viable for this week.
Yeah, last year, again, it was 4 out of 17 perfect lineups had a running back paired to the opposing running back. Like, that's a pretty good rate. Yeah. So I think that works, and I'm okay with that too. So I will also have Michael Thomas, Jarek stacks as a way to deviate from the average roster construction. Finally, a game that has some encouraging trends for stacking is between the Bucs and the Panthers. The Bucs were 6.5-point favorites. They are now down to 4.5, thanks to a lot of money coming into the Panthers. Apparently, people are onto the fact that Teddy always covers. The total has increased from 250.5 from 48. So both those are very good trends. But the Bucs defense is still really good. So how are you viewing Mike Davis and others in this game?
Sorry, I thought you said the total went from 250.5, which, I
mean, Teddy could make that happen.
Yeah, I was going to say, with Teddy, anything's possible.
Tom Brady, I don't know if he'll hold up his end, but Teddy could do that.
So I think Tom Brady's interesting, but I'll go with Mike Davis, which is I think what you asked.
Yeah. And then 25. Rank the value backs because I like torturing you.
Yeah. So Mike Davis had 25.5 adjusted opportunities per game without Christian McCaffrey. Adjusted opportunities for us are carries plus 2x targets, just because targets are more valuable even on FanDuel.
Those receiving yards still count just the same.
Yeah. You can kind of spin it as he had a week to rest up with McCaffrey back, but maybe that was part of why he was on the decline. The issue is the Buccaneers are just an outlier defense with how good they are against the rush. He did enter, his first game when Christian McCaffrey got hurt against the Bucs. I think he wound up with like 8 targets. So you can play that angle.
In the fourth quarter. He had 7 in the fourth quarter, I think.
So like you can play that angle. I just don't know what the realistic upside is. The redeeming factor is the salary. He's not even like 64, he's 54.
Yeah.
I think that's low enough where you can kind of embrace a floor game. Again, though, if you're playing Mike Davis against the Bucs and he can get you 15 because of how bad the matchup is, you really have to find upside elsewhere. You really have to hit on your other guys. And yes, it's possible, but I think Mike Davis is fine, but I think he'll be more popular than he should be.
Okay, so let's rank them. Guys, $6,000 and lower. We'll include Kenyon Drake. Let's assume that Kenyon Drake plays.
And David Johnson doesn't.
David Johnson does not. We'll also assume that Darrell Henderson doesn't, just for the sake of discussion. I would rate them Jarek 1, Malcolm Brown 2, Mike Davis 3, Duke Johnson 4. Actually, sorry, Kenyon Drake. So Jarek 1, Malcolm Brown 2, Kenyon Drake 3, Mike Davis 4, Duke Johnson 5.
So you said, okay. I think that might be right.
Okay.
Honestly, which is weird because I think it'll be close to like the inverse in popularity.
I know. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And I don't think it's from the sake of trying to be contrarian. I think, look, Mike Davis probably trending toward like a 90% snap rate, but I just don't know.
Played 77 and 88 in the final 2 games without McCaffrey, and I think those are the 2 best ones because that was when Curtis Samuel was healthy and he only played like 9 total backfield snaps, but he had 2 rushing touchdowns in those games.
Yeah.
So those are the 2 most relevant ones to me.
So that's another factor is Curtis Samuel's involvement. That's a good point. So
involvement in high leverage spots, which is the biggest concern.
Yeah. So I think that I think we're on the same page where it's not, I kind of came into this where it's Duke Johnson and Mike Davis, but I think there's more value at running back. Again, I think for us, it's safe to say we'll have limited exposure to these guys.
Just kind of mix and match, I think.
I think what's most realistic, hopefully this isn't too boring, but, Kamara, Jones, Miles Sanders, probably have 2 of them in your lineups and then kind of rotate in, you're maybe pick 3 of the 5 or 2 of the 5, depending on how many lineups you play. Don't try to play all of them. I think that might be a little bit, unless you're playing mass multi-entry, but yeah, I think, I don't know. I think the value backs are a little bit more intriguing, but specifically not the ones that I thought entering the podcast.
Right. And I think, I agree with your thought that those will be the ones that are most popular, which is good. I would say, so Jarek's my number 1. I would say my max exposure to Jarek, I would hope would be 20%.
Yeah.
So take that for what it is. I don't know. I agree with you where I rotate through. Prioritizing them again. Jarek 1, Brown 2, if Henderson sits.
And not to linger too long, but I think it's very easy to look at the top 3 running backs and the higher salaries, but I still don't want to forget about Josh Jacobs or potentially James Robinson.
True.
So I think like someone like Jacobs, I wish like James Conner had the role that his salary implies he should have. If Nick Chubb returns, just because we're kind of talking running backs,
sure,
would you go there at 82?
I'm assuming that he will.
Right.
They're also getting Wyatt Teller back. So I'm writing about this for tomorrow in my piece, but I think that I'm actually going to handle Nick Chubb the same way I do Derrick Henry because they kind of have similar usage.
Yeah.
Except it's not as good. So I think that I'm going to ask myself, what are the odds that Nick Chubb burns me for not using him? Against the Texans, given the fact that Kareem Hunt will still get work, I think it's 15%.
Okay, I think that's fair.
That might be too high, but...
No, I think he seems to be unconcerned about the injury.
Yeah.
And we know...
he's talking about playing without a brace, which seems wild.
Look, we know if a Derrick Henry type can do some stuff against the Texans, we know that that's possible.
Oh, boy. Again, he's not Derrick Henry because the usage is different, but I think that they're very similar because Chubb can still have ceiling games despite his bad usage. And I think that's the difference between him and, a Todd Gurley and a David Johnson. So there's that. Weather for this week. We could have some wind in Cleveland. Speaking of the Browns, for the Browns and Texans, that's projected at 19 miles per hour, and there is rain in the forecast too. Total has already come down 3.5 points, so it does seem like bettors are concerned there. Chris Allen's mentioned that the stadium does not take on much wind. When it was 27 mile per hour winds, it was different, but might be more okay this weekend. Same thing out in Green Bay for the Packers and Jaguars, projected at 26 miles per hour, some possible rain as well there. Sounds like the stadium is more of a concern in Green Bay, so keep an eye on that. And finally, there's rain in the forecast for Steelers and Bengals. Just 12 mile per hour winds, which isn't terrible, but still, that game kind of sucks anyway. Brandon, we didn't talk about that game. Are you going at the Steelers against the Bengals or any Bengals here?
Probably not. The Steelers have some market share issues.
Some?
some. And then the Bengals have a matchup issue. Pro Football Focus does an offensive line, defensive line like matchup chart. They show like percent. I don't really know what the percentages imply, but I know that a negative percentage is a bad matchup for offensive lines, and they were at negative 103%, which usually like it's like 40% is as bad as I see. I feel like so. I don't know how the Bengals are going to fare this week, but I don't have a lot of interest in that game.
Just pray for Joe Burrow, man. Pray for Joe Burrow. Protect Joe Burrow. Literally protect Joe Burrow. Let's move into our position-by-position breakdown for our favorite plays on FanDuel for week number 10. Starting off with you, Brandon. Who are you targeting at quarterback for this week?
I'm going to go with Josh Allen at the top at 8,700. He's been good on the full season. We like this game the most. I think we're both in agreement that this game has the best quarterbacks. He's played 6 games against opponents outside the top 10 in numberFire's adjusted pass defense metric. Arizona's 14th. In those games, he's at 0.29 passing net expected points per dropback, so twice the league average in efficiency there. Averaged 24 FanDuel points per game on 290 passing yards, 1.5 passing touchdowns. The rushing has dipped a little bit here and there, but he's now had 7 or more carries in 4 straight games as well. So Josh Allen, I think, is a very justifiable play. I do think it's another week, and we didn't really talk about this too much, where the high-salaried quarterbacks have upside that's kind of hard to get to if you spend down. But if you are spending down, I think Drew Brees is appealing at 7,600. I think that's a very fair salary for someone who can get you a floor and somewhat of a ceiling. I was hard on him on Monday's recap show, but based on how the slate goes, I might need to spend down a little more often than I want to at quarterback so I can get up to the running backs, maybe 1 or 2 stud receivers in a lineup as well, more specifically 1. But Drew Brees is, like, we know he's good. The 49ers are 19th against the pass, 4th against the rush, so there might be kind of that funnel effect here. Michael Thomas is back, and in 5 games against pass defenses outside the top 10, Drew Brees is at 0.34 passing net expected points per dropback, 290 passing yards, 1.8 touchdowns. The issue here is pace, but you can stack Brees with Alvin Kamara or Michael Thomas. And I think Tom Brady's also kind of in the mix for someone who we haven't talked about as well.
Who would you stack Brady with? Because I think I lean Antonio Brown.
So what's the deal with Chris Godwin? Is he hurt again?
No, I think he's fine. I'm pretty sure he's just limited because of his finger.
If he plays, it'd be Godwin based on what we saw last week. I was really trying to put stock into last week, but Brown's.
I think Godwin is easily second behind me putting Brown first. I just like Brown because of the salary at $6,500.
I was going to say the salary would probably get me to Brown, but it's those two, not Mike Evans, unfortunately.
Okay. My first love at quarterback is Kyler Murray because I just think that he and Josh Allen, who was your first love, are just the 2 best quarterbacks in the slate by a decent chunk. I would give the edge to Murray because he runs so much. He's actually averaging 68 rushing yards per game. That is worth more than 1.5 passing touchdowns. As Brandon mentioned, in the trend section, he's passing better recently. He's throwing the ball downfield. He's actually generating passing points too. He's top 33 FanDuel points 3 times this year. His floor is 23 points. That's amazing. He's only $8,800, so Kyler Murray, just too good. Too good. My second love, if I want to spend down, will be Jared Goff, because if you don't run, you got to go nuts through the air to pay off. And I think Goff has that ability. They've been less run-heavy since the first 2 weeks of the season. And I think that what's interesting here is actually the Rams' defense. Rams' defense has been very good. But they faced a lot of bad offenses. This will be the second time all year they face a top 10 offense, which means the Rams haven't had to do a whole lot in the second half. Like, they've been able to coast a bit. They can't do that here. They're also facing a team that's just hideous against the pass. So I think that the upside is better than it's shown so far for the Rams. And as a result, I think Goff is my favorite low-salary quarterback. I agree that Brees is very much in play, and I'd put him number 2 on that list. Let's move now to running back, Brandon. Who do you have there?
So I might need to pivot on 2 of these guys, which is not fun. But look, there are 3 running backs I feel good about. One of them is Aaron Jones at 8,800. He played 61% of the snaps last week in a blowout, which makes me feel a little bit better. And whenever he's on the field, he's getting work. 15 carries and 5 targets, which is 25 adjusted opportunities, which is fine. It's not great. No touchdowns there, though. But if this game stays remotely close, Aaron Jones definitely has a path to a huge ceiling. He could see a somewhat similar script, but he's 10 days removed from that injury that he had and was on the field, like you said, for more of the game than he probably should have been. The Jaguars are fairly decent against the run, 12th in rushing success rate allowed, but 23rd in target success rate allowed. So I don't really see any reason to ding Aaron Jones for this matchup. My second love, I'll just stick with it. It's going to be James Robinson in that same game, but I think I'm going to probably lean more toward Josh Jacobs if he's fully healthy, because when Josh Jacobs is healthy, he has a very good role. James Robinson's a double-digit underdog, which is not what we usually recommend at running back, but I think that's kind of where we are at running back this week. And last week, he had 25 carries for 99 yards, 2 empty targets, played 72% of the snaps. It's common for him to get 4 targets, which he had done every game since week 2. Chris Thompson kind of ate into that a little bit, but the salary is not bad for $7,300. I could be wearing blinders, but I do still trust James Robinson to get a 70% snap rate and be involved. Again, I might go with Josh Jacobs by Sunday. I probably will, so it's close. And
I think the good thing is that, with James Robinson, if they keep that game remotely close, he will pay off. I can almost guarantee. Let's say the odds that they keep it kind of close are 40%. They don't win, but keep it kind of close. If their odds of keeping it close are 40%, I think his odds of paying off if they keep it close are 75%. So 0.4 times 0.75 is math that I can't do in my head, but that's enough to justify James Robinson.
Yes. So I think that Robinson is one of the first.
It's 0.3. I'm very stupid. I don't know why. Go ahead. I'm dumb. I'm not doing math in my head anymore, but I figured it out.
I'm still wavering on his third one because I had Duke Johnson, but I think throughout the podcast I'm lowest on him. I don't feel comfortable that Malcolm Brown will get a game without Darrell Henderson, so I don't want to go with Malcolm Brown. I don't know necessarily about Kenyon Drake, so I'm just going to go by default with Mike Davis because the salary is $5,400 again. It's not even $6,000. He had averaged 25.5 adjusted opportunities per game without Christian McCaffrey. Was trending down a bit. There are concerns about Curtis Samuel, but he still rates out well, even in a very difficult matchup because the volume should be predictable. The snap rate should be predictable. But again, I think you and I are just both on the same page where we don't love Mike Davis, we don't love Duke Johnson, and we're just overall lower on the value backs than most people probably are this week.
I hope so. I would like to be underweight on them, except the ones
people
that
love to chase value at running back.
Yeah, so I hope we are underweight because that just means we'll be more overweight on Alvin Kamara. And I have more faith in this game being close than Aaron Jones's. So if I had to pick one, I'd go Kamara, but I think they're both rock star plays. I'm not going to nitpick there. Kamara didn't play a ton in the blowout last week, but he's had one full game with Michael Thomas this year. He had 28 adjusted opportunities in that game. That was against the Bucs as well. So tougher matchup, but they gave him a lot of work. San Francisco is good, but I don't care. I think Kamara is just a priority at $9,000 this week. My second love will be Miles Sanders. I just love the workload and I love the spot here because Sanders in his full games has 27 adjusted opportunities per game. The offense is getting healthier. That should increase the efficiency and touchdown chances of this team. So that's why we have Miles Sanders so high on our list, despite the fact he's coming off an injury. Finally, Jerick McKinnon will be my favorite value back. We can poke holes in everyone, but I think McKinnon is the one I feel best about getting volume. The 49ers did fall flat last week, but they didn't have Trent Williams, Brandon Ayuk, Kendrick Bourne. All three will be back this week from the COVID list. And McKinnon in that game had a 74% snap rate, 6 carries and 1 target in the first half, which is not great, but they were getting roasted. They've also had 10 days between games. There's been concerns about McKinnon's legs being healthy. They should be rested by now, I would hope. And if you look at just the games where Jerick McKinnon has played half the snaps, just half, I'm not putting it higher than that, he's averaged 15.2 FanDuel points per game. He actually has double-digit points in 6 games this year, which is wild, given the role he's played. That's partly because he is overperformed by a lot in the touchdown department, but he gets receiving yards, he gets receptions. So I kind of think it's McKinnon at 55 is my favorite one. I don't know. I could feel very stupid about this on Monday.
I think you've talked me into it, though. I think it's a little bit scary, which is the whole point of not wanting to anchor a lot of lineups to value running backs, because I don't think any of them are locks. We've had value running back locks before. If Mike Davis were in a soft matchup, I would feel different, but I don't think any of them are just locks to put up 20 FanDuel points.
I agree. So McKinnon number one for us, and hopefully we can watch our boy Jarek run free once again on Sunday. Let's move to wide receiver. What do you have there, Brandon?
I'm going to start with Will Fuller because he's 7,100, and we talked about the higher salaried receivers, but more realistically, I'll be starting closer to someone like Will Fuller at 71, and this also works as kind of a 2-for-1 with Brandon Cooks at 6,300. Kind of going to lump them together here, but in 4 games against non-elite pass defenses, Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller have benefited from Deshaun Watson playing better. Again, Cooks does lead in target share by a percentage point, 24-23, but Fuller gets 2.5 downfield targets per game in that sample. And in those 4 games, Fuller averages 18.4 FanDuel points per game. Cooks is at 14.8, so both very much in play at reasonable salaries. My second and third loves, I should say, I'm pretty sure I had these guys last week, but Robbie Anderson, again, 6,400. Over the past 2 games with Curtis Samuel more involved, he still leads the team with 26% on targets, which is 10 per game. It's been DJ Moore who's losing the work. Anderson leads in air yard share in that sample with 36%, 3 downfield targets per game, and he's also still the biggest touchdown regression candidate at the position. Has not scored since week 1. That's not the best matchup, but Anderson has multi-touchdown upside. We should feel pretty good with Robbie Anderson being able to score twice on some big plays. And my third love is Jerry Jeudy. We have to keep an eye on the status, but he's 5,800. In 2 games with Drew Lock, Tim Patrick, Noah Fant, and KJ Hamler healthy, Jeudy leads the team with 21% of targets. He has 7 downfield targets in that span, which is 3.5 per game. And the Raiders, just 25th in adjusted pass defense. They have no real cornerbacks worth worrying about. According to Pro Football Focus, I don't know, but that helps.
I like Jeudy. I have some very stupid mild interest in KJ Hamler. I should probably talk myself out of that by Sunday, but I might not, so we'll see. My first love is Cooper Kupp. Again, shocking. If you know me, you know that I don't talk myself into Cooper Kupp very often, but the market shares are super strong. The matchup and game environment combo is really hard to match. So, if I'm ever going to use Cooper Kupp, it's going to be this week. He is $7,700. He has topped 100 yards twice this year. He didn't score in one of them, so his upside in terms of fantasy points has been masked. And like you said, he's a touchdown regression candidate. He's getting enough deep volume to have a ceiling, even though, again, that's always my concern with Kupp is his ceiling. So I'm going to go Cooper Kupp, which, again, very rare for me, but we'll do it. My second love is Christian Kirk. He is $6,300, but should have a great matchup this week. DeAndre Hopkins might see Tre'Davious White. If he doesn't, that just boosts the entire offense and still is good for me with Christian Kirk. So the other Bills cornerbacks are beatable. They rank 21st against the pass, according to numberFire's metrics. We look at Kirk since coming back from his injury, as Brandon mentioned, 19.5% of the overall targets, 26% of the deep targets. Kyler is hitting him on those deep throws now too, which is good. And just a good game environments. My third love is in that same game with John Brown. He is $5,600 and really good showing last week. He had 11 total targets. 2 of those were deep. They actually got him some screens too, which is good for his floor. In the healthy games that John Brown has played, he has 20% of the team's overall targets, 23% of the deep targets, and 23% in the red zone. So I think that John Brown is a rock star play this week. Had a lot of him last week. Going to have a lot of him again this week. I also like Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Reagor, and Josh Reynolds as guys below $6,000. And again, I should talk myself out of KJ Hamler, but, whatever. Tight end, what do you have there, Brandon?
Your mortal enemy, Evan Ingram, 5,600. I think Dallas Goedert at 5,800 is very deserving as well, but I've been building some lineups, and $200 kind of goes a long way sometimes just to get you there. But Ingram leads the Giants with a 27% target share over the past 3 games with Sterling Shepard back. That's worked out to 9.7 targets, 1.7 downfield targets. The Eagles are 28th in target success rate allowed to tight ends, so I think he's a bring back for Miles Sanders lineups. So I feel pretty good with Evan Ingram. My second love is Jim's new mortal enemy, never again candidate, Mike Gesicki, 5,300. Just 6 targets from Tua through 2 games, but has an 8 out of 13.5 yards on them. And that's a small sample, but it was 11.5 yards before Tua took over. So look, he basically leads all tight ends in average target depth if you don't count OJ Howard. So he hasn't scored since week 3. I understand why we can be down on him. The matchup itself is not great. The Chargers are 4th in target success rate allowed to tight ends, but the game environment's not terrible. There should be a volume uptick with Preston Williams out. So I think Gesicki, there should be a yardage floor. Whether it's there or not, I don't know. There should be touchdown regression. Whether that comes, I don't know. But I think for the salary, he's fine again.
So I think the other reason I hate Gesicki is that I actually thought for a second that Mac Hollins touchdown was Gesicki.
That's true.
And I was like, oh, wow, my Gesicki lineups got bailed out. And then I was like, no, they didn't, you idiot. And he kind of looks a lot
the announcer said it was Gesicki, I believe.
Okay, that's probably why I thought it. Okay. That contributed to it. So instead of going Gesicki and hating my life again, I'll go Hunter Henry on the other side, because Henry hasn't had more than 40 yards since week 3, which sucks. But the Dolphins' corners are legit. So I think the hope here is that they kind of funnel more targets to the tight end than the receivers. Henry actually has 17% of the overall targets in games with Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams, which is a good number for a tight end. He's not getting a lot of high leverage work, but it still feels like that's in his range of outcomes. He's $5,500, so Hunter Henry will be in play for me this week. But if I have one lineup, it's going to be Austin Hooper, almost guaranteed, because he's $5,100. He's coming back after an appendectomy. He averaged 7.3 targets per game in his final 3 games before he had that surgery. He's got a super sick matchup at the Texans. This is the first game for him with no Odell Beckham, so the targets were good before. They could be even better now. So I think that Hooper at $5,100 is tremendous. Let's finish up here with defense, Brandon. Who do you have there?
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind we always try to go with lower salary defenses. So I'm going to go with Washington at 3,800. They're on the road, but the Lions without Kenny Golladay is just not very threatening. They haven't been very good. Matthew Stafford is trending toward being fine after his concussion scare. But Washington's actually a solid defense, 11th overall in adjusted defense based on numberFire's metrics, 17th against the pass, 8th against the rush. Usually want to target games with higher totals, but I just don't see many paths to Detroit putting up a ton of points considering how they played without Golladay.
Also, if you look at PFF grades, which can be, we can argue against anything, but Stafford hasn't played that well this year, especially without Golladay. So I think that's worth noting too. And that defensive line should do a lot of work. So I think that they're in play too. My love is Las Vegas. I love Drew Lock, but Drew Lock is very friendly to opposing defenses. They're $3,500 at home against Lock. So Vegas is not a good defense, but again, Lock can do some things. I used Atlanta's defense last week. If I use them, I should be willing to use Las Vegas. So they're the default low salary option for me. I also do like Washington, as you mentioned. I like Detroit in that same game against Alex Smith. I like Tampa Bay against Teddy in the games where I don't use Panthers. And then New Orleans, just because I like Jarek, but Nick Mullins has been pretty bad. So I think I need to consider all those teams. And those are the defense I would highlight for this week. Brendan, any final thoughts for you before we close up shop for week 10?
I think the biggest thing for all of us while we're building lineups is to go through the value backs and see which ones we trust. You might think we're idiots for not loving Mike Davis or loving Duke Johnson. If you feel that way, that's fine. But I think there are reasons to be concerned for most of, if not all of the value backs, which is why I think we're once again, paying up for those running backs in this house.
Yep. We're back. We're back, baby. We're back. We're game stacking. We're paying up at running back. What could go wrong? Do not forget to enter the Listener League. Go to FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. $5 entry, 3 entries max. There is no rake here. FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. In this house, we also don't pay rake. So make sure you go to FanDuel.com/league/Listener League or check out the link in the podcast post up on numberFire.com. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Back with you on Monday to wrap it all up. But until then, good luck with your Masters and your NFL lineups. We'll talk to you once again on Monday. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.